Well, look who's here. The President of the United States stopped mid-sentence. He had been talking about the declassified documents, the ones Tulsi Gabbard had released that morning, the ones showing what he'd been saying for 8 years, the ones that proved, in his view, the entire Russia investigation had been manufactured from nothing. He was in the Rose Garden, which was his favorite place to hold press conferences, because the light was good, and the backdrop was beautiful, and the walk back to the Oval Office was short enough that he could finish on a high note and be behind his desk before the cable networks cut away. 200 reporters, 30 cameras, an October afternoon so clear it looked like a painting. He had been mid-sentence. Something about the intelligence community assessment and how it was a total fraud, a complete fabrication, and frankly an embarrassment to the intelligence community, which, by the way, used to be great, used to be the best in the world, but has become, and I hate to say it because I respect the men and women who serve, I really do, incredible people, but has become a political operation for the other side. When the commotion started, it began at the back of the press area. A murmur, heads turning, Secret Service agents speaking into their wrists, a figure moving through the media section, not a reporter, not a cameraman, but a man in a navy suit and a red tie who walked with the deliberate posture of someone who knew exactly where he was going and intended everyone to see him arrive. Adam Schiff, Senator Adam Schiff, Democrat of California, former chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, former lead impeachment manager, former member of the January 6th Select Committee, and in the estimation of the man standing at the podium, the single most dishonest human being in the history of American politics. He had not been invited. He was there, his office would later explain, to exercise his right of response as a United States Senator to the President's false characterizations of the Russia investigation. He was there because the declassified documents were, in his view, being misrepresented, and because someone had to stand up to the disinformation, and because Adam Schiff had spent 8 years refusing to be intimidated by Donald Trump, and he was not about to start now. What he had not calculated, what his staff had not calculated, what his communications director and his legal counsel and his chief of staff had all failed to anticipate, was the look on Donald Trump's face when the President of the United States spotted his oldest enemy walking into his own backyard. It was the smile, the wide, predatory, delighted smile of a man who has been waiting for something for a very long time and has just realized it's being handed to him for free. Pencil neck himself. Ladies and gentlemen, look at this. Adam Schiff in the Rose Garden. I didn't invite him. Nobody invited him. He just showed up, like a bad penny. Like a, what do they call those things, a party crasher. He's crashing my press conference. The press corps erupted. Cameras swiveled. Reporters shouted questions. Trump waved them all down with a hand that had, over the course of 40 years in the public eye, perfected the gesture that means shut up. I'm about to do something you're going to want to see. Come on up, Adam, come on, don't be shy. You weren't shy when you went on CNN every night for 7 years. You weren't shy when you read a fake transcript into the congressional record. Come on up here and say it to my face. I've been waiting for this. 8 years I've been waiting. Schiff stopped about 20 feet from the podium. He stood in the area where reporters normally stood, behind the rope among the cameras at ground level. The podium was on a raised platform. Trump looked down at him. Schiff looked up. The geometry alone told a story. The president above, the senator below. You can come closer, Trump said, and his voice shifted from shouting to something almost conversational, almost warm, the voice of a host welcoming a guest he intended to destroy. I know the walk is hard with that neck holding up that big head, but come on. I want America to see this. I want them to see us together for the first time. The President of the United States and the man who tried to destroy him, standing right here in the Rose Garden, in the most beautiful garden in the world, by the way. And I want to ask one question. Just one. Very simple. He leaned into the microphone. To one. To understand the weight of that question. To understand why 200 reporters held their breath, and why 30 cameras zoomed in, and why the White House communications staff stood frozen against the colonnade like figures in a painting. You have to understand that this was not a normal political confrontation. This was the culmination of the most personal, most vicious, most sustained feud in modern American political history. 8 years, 2 impeachments, one special counsel investigation, one censure resolution, thousands of tweets, hundreds of cable news appearances, nicknames, Pencil Neck, Shifty Skiff, Watermelon Head, Crooked Adam, so numerous that Trump's own staff had begged him to pick one and stick with it. And he had refused because, as he told an aide, "Why should I pick one? They all work." The feud had begun in 2017 when Schiff, as the ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, had started appearing on cable news to discuss the FBI's investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election. At first, his appearances were measured, lawyerly precise. Then they became more frequent. Then they became more specific. And then, on a Sunday morning in March 2017, Adam Schiff looked into an MSNBC camera and said the words that would define his career and haunt his reputation. "I can tell you that the case is more than that. And I can't go into the particulars, but there is more than circumstantial evidence now. More than circumstantial evidence." He said it on MSNBC. He said it on CNN. He said it on ABC. He said it dozens of times, then hundreds. He said it with the quiet authority of a man who had seen classified intelligence and was telling the American people as much as he was permitted to that what he had seen was damning. And America believed him, or at least half of America believed him, because he was the chairman of the Intelligence Committee and he had access to information that ordinary citizens didn't. And when a man with a security clearance tells you he's seen the evidence, you tend to believe him. The problem was that the evidence didn't exist. Robert Mueller's investigation, which lasted 22 months and cost approximately $32 million and interviewed more than 500 witnesses, concluded in its first volume that the investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities. The Durham report, released in 2023, went further, concluding that the FBI had failed to uphold their important mission of strict fidelity to the law in launching the investigation. And the classified transcripts of the witnesses who had testified before Schiff's own committee, transcripts that Schiff had kept secret until they were forced into the open, showed that every single Obama administration official who testified under oath had said the same thing. They had seen no direct evidence of collusion. Schiff had heard them say it in his own committee room, under oath, and then he had walked out of that room and told America the opposite. Trump had called him a liar from the beginning. For 8 years, Trump had called him a liar, a fraud, a leaker, a traitor, a disgrace. He had sold T-shirts mocking Schiff's appearance. He had demanded his prosecution. He had called for his expulsion from Congress. And in June 2023, the House of Representatives had voted 213 to 209 to censure Schiff, formally reprimanding him for misleading the American people by claiming evidence of collusion that did not exist. Schiff had called the censure a badge of honor, and now he was standing in the Rose Garden, 20 feet from the man who had been calling him Pencil Neck since 2019, and the entire country was watching. Trump smiled. He had not stopped smiling since Schiff appeared. "Adam," he said, "I've got some questions for you. And I know you're not used to answering questions. You're used to asking them. You're used to sitting in your little committee room with your little gavel and your very, very serious face. You know the face, right? The one where you look like you just found out your dog died. That face. You love that face. The cameras love that face. CNN especially loves that face, although nobody watches CNN, so I don't know why you bother." Nervous laughter from the press section. A few reporters covered their mouths. This was unprofessional. This was beneath the office. This was also, and everyone knew it, impossible to look away from. Here's my first question. Very simple. You went on television, every network, every show, any microphone you could find, and for 7 years you said you had evidence that I colluded with Russia. More than circumstantial evidence. Your exact words. You said them so many times that I think even you started to believe them. Like one of those guys who tells a lie so often he forgets it's a lie. Robert Mueller. 32 million, Adam, 32 million, that's a lot of money. Even by Washington standards, that's a lot of money. 500 witnesses, 2 years. And at the end of it, page 2, volume 1, I've got it memorized because I've read it more than you have. The investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government. Did not establish. No collusion, no conspiracy, no coordination, nothing, nothing. So my question, Adam, and take your time, the weather is beautiful, the roses are in bloom, we've got all afternoon. Where is the evidence? Where is this more than circumstantial evidence that you told America about for 7 years? Can you show it to us? Can you hold it up? Can you point to it? Because I've been looking for it for 8 years and I can't find it. Mueller couldn't find it. Durham couldn't find it. And now Tulsi, great Tulsi Gabbard, unbelievable person, Tulsi just declassified the transcripts from your committee, your own witnesses, under oath, and they all said the same thing. No evidence. Clapper said it, Rice said it, Yates said it, Power said it. They all said it to your face in your committee room, and you heard them say it. And then you walked out of that room, you got in front of a camera, and you told the American people you had more than circumstantial evidence. You knew it wasn't true. You knew because you just heard the witnesses say it wasn't true. And you lied anyway. That's not politics, Adam. That's fraud. And if I did that in real estate, if I told a buyer I had evidence a building was worth 100 million when I knew it was worth 10, I'd be in prison. In prison. But you did it for 7 years on national television and nothing happened. Nothing. Because you're a Democrat in California. And in California, you can lie every day of the week and twice on Sunday and nobody cares. Schiff had been standing with his arms folded, his expression the practiced mask of a man who has been insulted by Donald Trump so many times that the insults have become background noise. He unfolded his arms. He spoke. Mr. President, the evidence of your campaign's interactions with Russian operatives was extensively documented in the Mueller report. Over 200 contacts between your campaign and Russian-linked individuals, 34 indictments, 7 convictions. The evidence was presented in open hearings and in classified sessions that you continue to misrepresent. Trump was grinning before Schiff finished his second sentence. 200 contacts. He's back to the contacts. 200 contacts. Adam, a contact is when someone shakes your hand at a conference. A contact is when you're at a dinner and someone sits at your table. I have contacts with everybody. I've met the Pope. I've met the Queen. I've had dinner with the President of China. That doesn't mean I'm working for the Vatican. Laughter. Genuine this time. Even from the reporters who didn't want to laugh. Because the image, Trump working for the Vatican, was absurd in the specific way that Trump's comedy was always absurd. Exaggerated but built on a real point. And the convictions, he brings up the convictions. You know what those convictions were for? Tax fraud, bank fraud, lying to Congress, which by the way is Schiff's specialty. None were for colluding with Russia. You know who got convicted of collusion? Nobody. Nobody. Because there was no collusion. But let me move on because I could talk about this all day. I really could. It's my favorite subject. Other than the economy, which is doing great by the way. Record stock market, record low unemployment. But I want to talk about something else. Something that still makes me, and I don't get angry very often, I'm a very calm person, very even-tempered, ask anyone. Something that still makes me angry. September 26th, 2019. Adam, you remember that day. I know you do. Because that's the day you committed what I believe is the greatest fraud ever perpetrated in a congressional hearing room. He leaned forward on the podium. The entertainment was over. This was the prosecutorial Trump. The Trump who had sat through depositions and contract negotiations and board meetings for 40 years and knew how to close. You got up at a hearing, an Intelligence Committee hearing on live television, cameras from every network, and you read a transcript of my phone call with President Zelensky. Except, and this is the part that still amazes me, it wasn't the transcript. You made it up. You sat in that chair and you read words that I never said. You said I told Zelensky I want you to make up dirt on my political opponent. I never said that. Never. You said I told him I'm going to say this only 7 times, so you better listen good. I never said that either. You fabricated the entire conversation. You invented a phone call between the President of the United States and the President of Ukraine, and you read it out loud in a congressional hearing into the official record. And when Mike Turner, great congressman, very smart, when Mike Turner caught you, when he pointed out that those weren't my words, you know what you said? You said, and I want everyone to hear this, you said it was a parody. Trump paused, let it hang. A parody. He read a fabricated presidential phone call into the congressional record, the permanent official record of the United States Congress, and he called it a parody. That's like me fabricating a confession from Adam Schiff, and then when I get caught saying it was a joke. Can you imagine? Can you imagine if I did that? They'd impeach me again. A third time. But Schiff fabricates a phone call and it's a parody. It's comedy. It's satire. He turned to Schiff. Was it a parody, Adam? When you sat in that chair and read fake words to the American people, was that your sense of humor? Because I've done comedy. I've hosted Saturday Night Live. I know comedy. And that wasn't comedy. That was forgery. That was a forged document read into the official record of the United States Congress by the chairman of the Intelligence Committee. And you called it a parody. You called fraud a parody. But wait, there's more. There's always more with this guy. It's like an infomercial. But wait, there's more. The whistleblower. Remember the whistleblower? Big story. Biggest story in the world for about 3 weeks. Somebody filed a complaint about my phone call with Zelensky, and Schiff goes on MSNBC, September 17, 2019. I have the date memorized because I have a very good memory, probably the best memory of any president, definitely better than Biden's. And he says very seriously, very concerned with that face, we have not spoken directly with the whistleblower. We have not spoken directly with the whistleblower. Those were his words, on national television, to a very small audience because it was MSNBC, but still. And then, and this is the beautiful part, it comes out that the whistleblower had contacted Schiff's staff before filing the complaint. Before. The whistleblower went to Schiff's people first, got guidance, got advice, and then filed the complaint. And Schiff knew. He knew the whole time. He knew when he went on television and said we have not spoken. He knew his staff had spoken. He knew he was lying. And PolitiFact, which hates me, I want to be clear about that, they hate me. They have rated approximately 1,000 of my statements as pants on fire. Even PolitiFact looked at Schiff's claim and rated it false. False. When PolitiFact says a Democrat is lying, that's like, I don't know, that's like Rachel Maddow saying I have good hair. It never happens. But it happened for Schiff, because the lie was so obvious that even the people who rate me as a liar couldn't ignore it. And here's what really gets me. Here's the part that makes me crazy. When the coordination came out, when everyone found out that the whistleblower had talked to Schiff's staff, you know what Schiff did? He reversed his position. He had been demanding that the whistleblower testify publicly. Demanding it. The American people deserve to hear from the whistleblower. And then the second the coordination was exposed, he flipped. Suddenly, the whistleblower needed to be protected. Suddenly, it was too dangerous for the whistleblower to testify. Not because it was dangerous. Because the whistleblower would have had to answer questions about why he went to Schiff's staff first. Adam, that's not oversight. That's not investigation. That's a setup. You coordinated with the whistleblower, lied about the coordination, and then blocked the testimony that would have exposed the lie. That's not what a chairman does. That's what a criminal does. And I should know. You investigated me for 4 years looking for exactly that kind of behavior. Trump turned to the reporters. And speaking of crimes, Kash, great Kash Patel, incredible guy, director of the FBI, best we've ever had, Kash declassified some FBI interview notes last month. 302s, that's what they call them. 302s. It's a very technical term. I know all the technical terms because I've been investigated more than any human being in history. These 302s are interviews the FBI did with a former staffer on Schiff's committee. A Democrat staffer, not a Republican plant. A Democrat. And this staffer told the FBI under penalty of perjury, by the way, this isn't Twitter, this is the FBI, he told them that Schiff directed his staff to leak classified information. Classified. About me. About the Russia investigation. To the media. The staffer said Schiff told the group at a staff meeting, not a secret meeting, a regular staff meeting, that they would leak classified information that was derogatory to the President of the United States. That's me, by the way, in case anyone is confused. Derogatory to me. And that the information would be used to, and I'm quoting here, indict the President. Now if a Republican leaked classified information to the media to destroy a Democrat, you know what would happen. Prison. Immediate. No questions, no investigation. Prison. But Schiff does it and nothing. Nothing happens. Because he's got the right letter after his name. D for Democrat. D for dishonest. D for, well, I could think of other words, but I'll keep it clean because there are ladies present. He shook his head, then abruptly the shift again, serious to playful. You know, I've called him a lot of names over the years. A lot. People say, sir, you have too many nicknames for Adam Schiff. They say pick one and stick with it. And I say why? Why would I pick one? He deserves all of them. Shifty Schiff because he's shifty. Pencil neck because, well, look at him. He gestured toward Schiff with an open hand, like a game show host revealing a prize that nobody wanted. He buys, and I'm told this is true, he buys the smallest shirt collar they make, the absolute smallest, and it's still loose. How does that work? I'm serious. How does physics allow that? You've got this enormous head, really, really big head, sitting on a neck that's like, I don't know, like somebody put a watermelon on top of a pencil. Hence pencil neck and watermelon head. 2 for 1. 2 nicknames for the price of 1. Only from Trump. Laughter. Even from the Secret Service agents who were trained not to react. Even from Schiff's own aide who was standing 20 yards away and immediately looked at the ground. He looks like a bobblehead doll. You know the ones they give out at baseball games. That. Schiff. A bobblehead that went to Harvard or wherever he went. Did he go to Harvard? Stanford? I don't know, it doesn't matter. The point is he looks like if you flicked his head it would wobble for 20 minutes. And I know the media is going to write Trump attacks Schiff's appearance. And I want to be clear. I'm not attacking. I'm observing. I'm an observer. A very good observer. I observe things that other people are too polite to mention. And I'm mentioning it because somebody has to. From 20 feet away, Schiff spoke. His voice was calm, controlled, the voice of a man who had decided to deploy dignity against mockery. Mr. President, while you're entertaining yourself with comments about my appearance, perhaps we could discuss the Constitution of the United States, which you swore an oath to protect and which you have systematically undermined for 8 years. Trump pounced, not on the Constitution, on the opportunity. The Constitution. He brings up the Constitution. I love the Constitution. Nobody loves the Constitution more than me. Well, maybe Thomas Jefferson, but he's dead, so I'm number 1. But Adam, you read a fake transcript into the congressional record. You coordinated with a whistleblower and then went on MSNBC, which nobody watches, by the way, and lied about it. PolitiFact, which hates me. They rate everything I say as pants on fire, but even they rated your whistleblower claim as false. When PolitiFact says a Democrat is lying, that's like MSNBC saying I have nice hair. It never happens. And you want to lecture me about the Constitution. Adam, you got censured by the House of Representatives, your own institution. June 2023. Vote of 213 to 209. They made you stand in the well of the House. The well. The very center of the chamber where you stand when the institution wants to publicly tell you that you embarrassed it. And they read a resolution that said you misled the American people by claiming evidence that did not exist. And you know what you said? You said it was a badge of honor. A badge of honor. Getting censured for lying is a badge of honor. Only in the Democratic Party. Only in California. Only in Adam Schiff's head, which is very large by the way as we discussed, could getting publicly reprimanded by your own colleagues be considered an achievement. I got impeached twice. You know what? I called it a disgrace because I was innocent, because it was political persecution, and I fought it and I won. Twice. And I'm standing right here in the Rose Garden, the President of the United States, and you're standing over there next to the guy from CNN who nobody watches. And by the way, the impeachments. Let's talk about the impeachments, because Schiff didn't just investigate them. He led them. He was the lead manager, the star, the quarterback of impeachment. He stood up in the Senate, and gave this big dramatic speech about how I was a threat to the Republic and how nobody is above the law and how the founders would be rolling in their graves. Very dramatic, very emotional, very, I'll give him credit, very well delivered. Good performance. Not as good as mine, obviously, but for a Democrat it was pretty good. And you know what happened? The Senate voted to acquit me. Not once, twice, 2 impeachments, 2 acquittals. I'm the only president in history who was impeached twice and won twice. Nobody talks about the winning part. They only talk about the impeachment part, but I won both times. And you know what else I did? I ran for president again, and I won again. More votes than the first time, 80 million votes. The most votes any Republican has ever gotten, after 2 impeachments. So Adam, you impeached me and I came back stronger. You investigated me and I became more popular. You tried to destroy me and I became president again. At some point, don't you look in the mirror, that big bobblehead mirror, and say maybe I'm the one who's wrong. Maybe the American people don't agree with me. Maybe they see something I don't. No, he doesn't. Because Adam Schiff is the most self-righteous person in Washington. And in Washington, that's really saying something. And oh, this is beautiful. You know what happened when I won in 2024? You know what Biden did on his way out the door? He issued preemptive pardons. Preemptive, for Schiff, for the whole January 6th committee. All of them, before I could even take office. Now think about that. Think about what that means. Why would you pardon someone who hasn't been charged with anything? Why would you pardon someone who hasn't been accused of a crime? Unless you know that they did something that could be a crime. Biden pardoned Schiff because Biden knew what Schiff did. The leaks, the classified information, the coordination, the lies, Biden knew, and he pardoned him to make sure I couldn't prosecute him. That's not a pardon. That's an escape hatch. That's Biden opening the emergency exit for his buddy before the plane crashes. And Schiff accepted. He accepted the pardon. If you're innocent, if you did nothing wrong, why do you accept a pardon? That's like accepting a life jacket when you claim the boat isn't sinking. You accepted the pardon, Adam, because you knew you needed it. Trump paused, looked at Schiff, then at the reporters, then back at Schiff. Trump let the question echo. He was warming up, not winding down. He could feel it. The rhythm, the momentum, the strange alchemy of crowd energy and personal grievance and raw performance that had carried him through rallies and debates and press conferences for a decade. He was in this moment doing what he had always done better than anyone else in American politics, commanding attention, not requesting it, not earning it through careful argument and measured rhetoric, commanding it by being impossible to ignore. But here's the thing, he said, and his voice dropped, not to a whisper. Trump didn't whisper, but to a register that the reporters in the front row recognized as the setup for something serious. Here's the thing, Adam, and I want you to listen to this because it's going to bother you. It's really going to bother you, because you've spent your entire career, positioning yourself as Mr. Integrity, Mr. Rule of Law, Mr. I'm just doing my duty, Mr. Nobody is above the law. That's your brand. That's what you sell. Adam Schiff, the man who holds powerful people accountable. And you can't even fill out a mortgage application honestly. He let it land. The Federal Housing Finance Agency, not me, not Republicans, the FHFA, a federal agency, referred you to the Department of Justice for mortgage fraud. Mortgage fraud. You told the bank that your house in Maryland was your primary residence so you could get a cheaper rate on a Fannie Mae loan. But Adam, you're a congressman from California. You have to live in California. That's where your district is. That's where your voters are. So you also told California that your condo was your primary residence to get a state tax exemption. 2 primary residences at the same time in 2 different states. That's not a congressman. That's a magician. You were in 2 places at once. What are you, a quantum physicist? Schrodinger's senator, simultaneously living in Maryland and California until someone opens the box. Laughter, even Trump laughed. The genuine laugh. The one that showed he surprised himself with his own joke. 5 Fannie Mae loans over 16 years. 5. And on every single one, the question of occupancy. And the FBI, my FBI, by the way, the one you keep saying I weaponized, the FBI is now investigating whether you lied on all 5. 5 times. And this is the man who investigated me for corruption. This man who can't even buy a house without committing fraud, he investigated me. I build buildings, Adam. I build towers. I build things that are so big you can see them from space. You can't even fill out a Fannie Mae form without lying. And you had the nerve to sit in that committee room and look into a camera and say I was corrupt. You, the guy with 2 primary residences and 0 evidence. Schiff had been standing through all of it. The mockery, the nicknames, the laughter. He had absorbed it the way he always absorbed Trump's attacks, with the rigid posture and fixed expression of a man who believes that dignity is its own defense. Now he stepped forward, 1 step, closer to the podium, closer to Trump, close enough that the microphones would catch his voice without amplification. "Mr. President," he said, and his voice was quiet, composed, the voice of a man making a closing argument to a jury. "You can insult my appearance. You can mock my name. You can sell T-shirts with my face on them. None of that changes the fact that you are a threat to the Constitution of the United States, to the rule of law, and to the democratic institutions that have sustained this republic for 250 years. I investigated you because the evidence demanded it. I impeached you because the facts required it. I sat on the January 6th committee because an insurrection required it, and I would do it all again." It was the best thing he'd said all afternoon. His best line. His most senatorial moment. The cameras caught it. The reporters scribbled it. MSNBC would run it on a loop for 3 days. On paper, on transcript, in the language of institutions and norms, it was a powerful statement from a United States senator standing his ground against a president who was mocking him in his own garden. Trump waited 3 seconds. The audience, reporters, staff, Secret Service watched. Then he spoke 2 words. "Are you done?" Schiff paused. "I am." "Good," Trump said. "Good speech. Very noble, very emotional, very, what's the word, senatorial. You should put it on a bumper sticker. But Adam, since you brought up facts, since you of all people brought up facts, let me give you some." His voice changed. The comedy was gone. The crowd work was gone. The nicknames were gone. What remained was the voice that people who had negotiated with Donald Trump in business had heard for 40 years. Flat, direct, and relentless. "You said you had evidence of Russia collusion. You didn't. Mueller said so. Durham said so. Your own witnesses said so. You read a fake transcript into the congressional record. When you got caught, you called it a parody. You told America you hadn't spoken to the whistleblower. PolitiFact rated that false. You got censured by the House of Representatives for misleading the American people. You called it a badge of honor. The FBI is investigating you for mortgage fraud. And Tulsi just declassified documents showing that every witness who testified to your committee under oath, Adam, under oath, said there was no evidence of collusion. Every single one. And you knew it. You sat in those hearings. You heard them say it. And you walked outside and told America the opposite. For 7 years. 7 years. That's longer than World War II. That's longer than most marriages. 7 years of looking into a camera and saying things you knew were not true, because it helped you, because it made you famous, because it raised money, because it got you on television, because it made you the hero of people who hated me. And now you come here to my house, the White House, the people's house, to lecture me about the Constitution." He paused, and then he did something he almost never did. He got quiet, not soft. Trump was never soft, but quiet. The volume dropped, the rhythm slowed, the performance stopped. What was left was a man talking to another man, and the country could hear both of them breathing. "Adam, I build buildings. Real buildings in New York, in Chicago, in Las Vegas. Buildings you can see and touch and walk into and look up at. When I say a building is 50 stories, you can count the floors. When I say it's made of steel, you can knock on it. Real things, things that exist. You built a hoax, a beautiful, elaborate 7-year hoax. Millions of people believed it because you said it with that face. That very serious, very concerned, very trustworthy face. And for 7 years the hoax stood. Not because the evidence supported it, because your face supported it. But hoaxes don't last, Adam. Buildings last. Hoaxes don't. And yours collapsed. The documents are out. The transcripts are public. Mueller said no collusion. Durham said the FBI cut corners. Tulsi declassified everything your committee tried to hide. Your hoax is a pile of rubble, and you're standing in the rubble trying to tell me I'm the one who's wrong. He straightened up. The quiet was over. The performance resumed. You impeached me twice. I won twice. You investigated me for 4 years. I'm president again. You got censured. I got reelected. You ran for Senate. I run the country. And I'm the threat to the Constitution. He turned to the press corps. 200 reporters, 30 cameras. The biggest audience any press conference had drawn all year. Who do you believe, him or your own eyes? He turned back to Schiff one last time. The smile returned, but different now. Not the predatory grin of the opening, something closer to dismissal. The way a man looks at a chapter of his life that's finally closing. Go home, pencil neck, go home. 8 words, 8 years. Schiff stood in the rose garden for 5 seconds after Trump said it. He didn't move. He didn't respond. He didn't reach for his phone or look at his aide or make a statement to the cameras that were all pointed at him, waiting. For 5 seconds, Adam Schiff, a man who had spent 8 years speaking, investigating, impeaching, testifying, appearing, responding, always responding, had nothing to say. Then he turned around and walked out of the rose garden. No press gaggle in the hallway. No quick statement to the CNN correspondent who jogged alongside him. No post-confrontation tweet from the Senate steps. He walked to the Northwest Gate, got into a black SUV, and left the White House. For the first time in the feud, Adam Schiff had no response. Not because he was wrong. His supporters would spend the next 72 hours arguing passionately that he was right about everything. Not because he was intimidated. Schiff had faced down Trump's fury for 8 years and would continue to do so. But because Trump had just performed for 30 minutes in his own garden, on his own stage, in front of his own cameras. And performance beats argument the way fire beats paper. You can be right and boring or wrong and riveting, and the cameras will follow the riveting every time. The clip "Go Home, Pencil Neck, Go Home" hit 78 million views in 48 hours. It became the most-watched moment of the Trump-Schiff feud, surpassing the impeachment hearings, the censure vote, and every cable news appearance either man had ever made. 8 words outperformed 8 years. The reactions split along the exact lines that every reaction to every Trump moment had split along since 2015. The liberal media called it bullying, beneath the office, an embarrassment to the presidency. MSNBC ran Schiff's Constitution speech on a loop and called it the most dignified moment of the Trump era. The conservative media called it a demolition, the greatest press conference in history, and the moment Pencil Neck finally met justice. Fox News replayed the mortgage fraud section 14 times before midnight. The neutral observers, the ones who existed in the narrow strip of American political analysis between devotion and revulsion, noted something that both sides were reluctant to acknowledge. The insults were built on facts. The parody transcript was real. Schiff had read fabricated words into the congressional record and called it a parody. The whistleblower lie was real. PolitiFact had rated it false. The censure was real. 213 to 209 read in the well of the House. The mortgage fraud investigation was real. FBI ongoing. The declassified transcripts were real. Every witness had said no evidence. Every single one. Trump hadn't just mocked Schiff. He had mocked him with the evidence. The comedy was wrapped around substance the way insulation wraps around a wire. You felt the shock because the current was real. Schiff tweeted 4 hours later. The President of the United States spent 30 minutes in the Rose Garden, insulting my appearance and mocking my name. This is what authoritarianism looks like. This is what happens when a man with unchecked power decides to humiliate a political opponent on national television. The tweet received 2.3 million likes. Below it, the top reply from an account with no political affiliation. A nurse from Ohio named Rebecca something said. He also mentioned the parody transcript, the whistleblower lie, the censure, and the mortgage fraud. Are you going to address those? That reply received 4.1 million likes. The asymmetry was devastating. Schiff's tweet was about dignity. The reply was about facts. And in the economy of social media attention, the reply won. In the weeks that followed, Trump mentioned the Rose Garden confrontation at 3 rallies, 2 fundraising dinners, and a bilateral meeting with the Prime Minister of Japan. Each time he told the story slightly differently, adding details, embellishing the comedy, improving the punchlines through the iterative process that had made his rallies the most watched political events in America. The mortgage fraud section became longer and funnier with each telling. The bobblehead joke acquired new variations. The closing line never changed. Schiff continued his Senate career. He continued appearing on cable news. He continued raising money. He continued being, in the view of Democrats, the most principled opponent of Donald Trump in public life. He had survived everything Trump had thrown at him for 8 years. Insults, nicknames, impeachment, censure, the threat of prosecution, and he would continue to survive. That was the thing about Adam Schiff. He didn't break. He didn't retreat. He didn't change his position or soften his rhetoric or seek accommodation. He was, in his way, as relentless as Trump, just quieter, just less entertaining, just less watchable. And that was the problem. Because in the country that both men inhabited, a country where attention was currency and entertainment was power, and the most watched moment won regardless of its relationship to truth, Adam Schiff's dignity was worth precisely nothing against Donald Trump's showmanship. Schiff could be right about every fact and lose every news cycle. He could deliver the most constitutional, most principled, most legally sound argument in the history of American political rhetoric, and it would be buried on page 9 by Go Home Pencil Neck. This was not a new observation. Media critics and political scientists had been making it since 2015, but the Rose Garden made it literal. For 30 minutes on national television, a law professor and a professional wrestler stood in the same garden and addressed the same country, and the country watched the wrestler, not because it agreed with him, because it couldn't look away. Trump ended the press conference the way he ended all of them, with a line that the reporters would carry with them to the filing center, and that the cable networks would run as a chyron until the next crisis replaced it. You know, he said, leaning back from the podium, his hands on the lectern, I've been dealing with pencil neck for 8 years. 8 years. Russia, Ukraine, impeachment, January 6th, the whole thing. 8 years of investigations and accusations and hearings and subpoenas. And you want to know the truth, the real truth. He smiled, the genuine one. I should send him a thank you card, because every time he came after me, my numbers went up. Every single time. Russia hoax, numbers went up. First impeachment, numbers went up. Second impeachment, I got more votes the second time than the first. January 6th committee, I won the nomination by the biggest margin in Republican history. Pencil neck Adam Schiff is the greatest campaign manager I never hired. Laughter. The press conference ended. Trump walked back to the Oval Office. The Rose Garden emptied. The cameras were packed away. The chairs were folded. And somewhere on the I-66, in the back of a black SUV heading toward Capitol Hill, Adam Schiff sat in silence with a phone full of supportive texts and a mind full of constitutional arguments and the absolute, unshakable certainty that he was right about everything. About Russia, about impeachment, about January 6th, about the threat that Donald Trump posed to the American Republic. He was perhaps right about all of it. But Go Home Pencil Neck had 78 million views, and his Constitution speech had 400,000. In the economy of American politics, the real economy, the one that determines who governs and who remembers and who gets the last word, that ratio was the only number that mattered. Not because it was fair, not because it was just, not because it reflected the truth about either man, because attention is the only currency that buys power. And Donald Trump was the richest man in the room. He always was. In the end, the Rose Garden was not a debate. It was a demonstration of the principle that had governed American politics since the moment Donald Trump rode down a golden escalator in 2015 and changed the rules of the game. In a fight between substance and spectacle, spectacle wins. Not because the public is stupid, not because the truth doesn't matter, but because the human brain is wired to remember the thing that made it feel something. Laughter, shock, outrage, delight, and to forget the thing that made it think. Schiff made people think. Trump made people feel. And in the competition for attention, feeling beats thinking every time. Adam Schiff knew this. He had known it for 8 years. He had watched Trump turn American politics into a reality show and had refused on principle, on conviction, on the sheer stubbornness of a man who believes that institutions matter more than entertainment, to participate. He had brought a legal brief to a comedy show. He had brought the Constitution to a roast. He had brought dignity to a cage match. And he had lost. Not the argument, the audience. The Rose Garden proved what both men had always known, but only one of them had ever admitted. In the arena where American politics actually happens, not the arena of courtrooms and committee hearings and constitutional law, but the arena of screens and feeds and clips and shares, Donald Trump is unbeatable. Not because he's right, because he's watchable. And in 2025, watchable is the only thing that matters. Schiff would continue to fight. He would continue to give speeches on the Senate floor. He would continue to appear on MSNBC and cite statutes and invoke precedents and make the case, carefully and precisely, and with abundant evidence, that Donald Trump was a danger to the republic. He would continue to be right about many things and wrong about some things, and principled about most things. And none of it would get 78 million views. Because Go Home Pencil Neck already did. And in the economy of attention, the only economy that elects presidents and destroys senators and determines who gets remembered and who gets forgotten, 8 words from a showman in a garden will always be worth more than 8 years of arguments from a lawyer in a hearing room. Always. But to truly understand what happened in the Rose Garden that October afternoon, to understand why it became the defining moment of the Trump-Schiff rivalry, and perhaps the defining moment of American political theater in the 21st century, you have to go back. Not to 2017 when the feud began, not to 2019 when it intensified, but to the fundamental difference between the two men. The difference that made every confrontation between them, not just political combat, but a collision of worldviews. Adam Schiff was a product of institutions. Harvard undergrad, Harvard Law, 6 years as a federal prosecutor in the Central District of California, State Senate, Congress, Intelligence Committee. The progression was linear, predictable, the kind of resume that had defined American political advancement for 100 years. Do the work, earn the credentials, rise through the ranks, trust the process. Donald Trump was a product of chaos, real estate developer, reality TV star, Twitter provocateur. The progression was non-linear, unpredictable, the kind of career path that had never existed in American politics before and probably wouldn't exist again. Break the rules, create the spectacle, dominate the attention, trust nothing but your instincts. Schiff believed in evidence, Trump believed in narrative. Schiff believed in procedure, Trump believed in momentum. Schiff believed that if you made the right argument with the right facts in the right forum, the truth would prevail. Trump believed that if you made the right joke at the right moment to the right audience, nothing else mattered. They were both in their own way correct, just not about the same country. The country Schiff believed in was the one taught in civics textbooks, the one where laws constrain presidents and committees uncover truth and the press reports facts and the people make informed decisions based on evidence and reason. That country did exist, in some form, in some contexts, in certain courtrooms and legislative chambers and editorial boardrooms. But it wasn't the country that elected presidents. The country that elected presidents was the one Trump understood instinctively. The one where attention was power and entertainment was legitimacy, and the most memorable moment mattered more than the most accurate argument. That country had always existed too. It just hadn't been fully unleashed until social media gave it a nervous system and Trump gave it a voice. The Rose Garden confrontation was a battle between those two countries, between the one that should exist and the one that does, between the world as Schiff wanted it to be and the world as Trump had made it. And Trump won, not because he was smarter or more prepared or more factually accurate, but because he understood that in the attention economy, the person who controls the story controls everything. And the way you control the story is not by having the best evidence. It's by being the most compelling character. Trump was always the most compelling character. Even his enemies, especially his enemies, couldn't deny it. He was funny. He was unpredictable. He was outrageous. He said things that made you gasp and then laugh and then wonder if you should be laughing. He broke every rule of political communication and somehow made breaking the rules look like strength rather than incompetence. Schiff was none of those things. He was careful. He was measured. He was prosecutorial. He said things that made you nod in agreement if you already agreed with him and tune out if you didn't. He followed every rule of political communication and somehow made following the rules look like weakness rather than professionalism. This wasn't a moral judgment. It was an observation about how attention works in a media-saturated democracy. And attention, not truth, was the currency that mattered in the Rose Garden. Consider the mechanics of what happened that day. Trump started with mockery, pencil neck himself, the nickname, the physical insult, the invitation to come closer, the whole theatrical setup. It was mean. It was childish. It was, by any traditional standard of presidential behavior, beneath the office. It was also riveting. Every reporter in that garden, even the ones who hated Trump, even the ones who would spend the next 3 days writing op-eds about how the confrontation represented everything wrong with American politics, knew they were watching something they couldn't look away from. The President of the United States was mocking a sitting senator, on camera, in real time, with no script and no teleprompter and no handler stepping in to stop him. It was car crash television, and everyone knows what happens when you drive past a car crash. You look. You can't help it. It's human nature. Trump understood human nature better than any politician of his generation, maybe better than any politician in American history. He understood that people don't want to be educated or informed or elevated. They want to be entertained. They want drama. They want conflict. They want heroes and villains and plot twists and climactic confrontations. And they want those things even when they claim they don't, especially when they claim they don't. The liberal viewers who spent the next week denouncing Trump's behavior, they watched the clip. Many of them watched it multiple times. They shared it. They commented on it. They made it go viral. Because even when you're horrified by something, even when you're morally outraged by something, you're still paying attention to it. And attention is what Trump needed. Not agreement, not approval, just attention. Schiff, by contrast, gave Trump exactly what he wanted. He showed up. He engaged. He took the bait. His staff would later defend the decision. The president was lying about the declassified documents. Someone needed to correct the record. Someone needed to stand up to the disinformation. All of that was true. All of that was also irrelevant. Because by showing up in the Rose Garden, by walking into Trump's carefully constructed theatrical space, Schiff transformed a press conference into a confrontation. And confrontations are Trump's natural habitat. He's been doing them for 40 years, in boardrooms, in courtrooms, on reality TV, at rallies, at debates. He knows how they work. He knows how to escalate them. He knows how to make them memorable. Schiff knew how to make arguments. Trump knew how to make moments. And moments are what people remember. Nobody remembers the substance of most political speeches. Nobody remembers the details of most policy debates. Nobody remembers the nuances of most legislative compromises. But everyone remembers the moments. Dean screaming in Iowa, Palin winking at the camera, Obama saying, "Yes, we can," Trump saying, "You're fired," Go home, pencil neck was one of those moments. 8 words that would be remembered longer than every congressional hearing Schiff ever chaired, longer than every speech he ever gave, longer than every investigation he ever led. Because it was funny, because it was mean, because it was dramatic, because it was Trump being Trump in the purest, most undiluted form imaginable. And Schiff, standing there in his Navy suit with his arms folded and his expression fixed and his dignity intact, represented everything that Trump had spent a decade fighting against. The establishment, the institutions, the rules, the norms, the expectation that politics should be serious and sober and conducted with decorum. Trump hated all of that, not because he was anti-intellectual or anti-democratic, though his critics would certainly argue both, but because he understood that decorum and seriousness and institutional norms were weapons that the establishment used to maintain power. They were gatekeeping mechanisms. They were ways of saying you can't be here, you don't belong, you haven't earned the right to speak. And Trump's entire political career was about breaking down those gates, about proving that you didn't need the right credentials or the right resume or the right tone to wield power. You just needed to be impossible to ignore. The Rose Garden proved it again. Here was Adam Schiff, Harvard-educated, federal prosecutor, 15 years in Congress, chairman of one of the most powerful committees in Washington, standing 20 feet from the president and making the most constitutionally sound, most legally precise, most institutionally proper argument imaginable. And it didn't matter. Not because he was wrong, not because Trump out-argued him, but because Trump outperformed him. Because Trump turned the confrontation into theater, and theater requires a villain, and Schiff, by showing up, had volunteered for the role. The staging alone told the story. Trump on the raised platform, Schiff on the ground, Trump at the microphone, Schiff among the reporters, Trump commanding the space, Schiff occupying it reluctantly, uncomfortably, like a man who knows he's in the wrong venue but feels obligated to stay anyway. It was visually a metaphor for their entire relationship. Trump in control, Schiff in pursuit, Trump setting the terms, Schiff reacting to them. For 8 years Schiff had been reacting to Trump's tweets, reacting to Trump's policies, reacting to Trump's scandals, reacting to Trump's lies, and reactions, by definition, seed the initiative. They put you on defense. They make you the supporting character in someone else's story. Trump's story had always been about winning, about fighting back, about defeating the people who were trying to destroy him. It was simple. It was compelling. It was, for his supporters, emotionally satisfying in a way that policy papers and legislative achievements could never be. Schiff's story had always been about duty, about defending institutions, about upholding the rule of law. It was complex. It was nuanced. It was, for his supporters, intellectually satisfying in a way that rallies and Twitter feuds could never be. But emotional satisfaction beats intellectual satisfaction in the attention economy, every time, without exception, because emotions are immediate, they're visceral, they're shareable. You can feel them in real time while watching a clip on your phone. Intellectual satisfaction requires context. It requires patience. It requires a willingness to read beyond the headline and think beyond the moment. And in 2025, most people didn't have that patience. Not because they were stupid, not because they didn't care, but because the information environment had been designed, through decades of technological evolution and market incentives, to reward the immediate and punish the complex. Trump thrived in that environment. Schiff struggled in it. Not because Schiff was a bad communicator. He was, by traditional standards, an excellent communicator. Clear, articulate, logical, but traditional standards didn't apply anymore. The rules had changed. And Schiff, either because he couldn't adapt or because he refused to on principle, kept playing by the old rules. Trump had rewritten the rules. In the old rules, you didn't mock your opponent's physical appearance. You engaged with their ideas. You made substantive arguments. You treated the presidency as a solemn responsibility that demanded dignity and restraint. In Trump's rules, you did whatever got attention. You made it personal. You made it funny. You made it memorable. And if that meant calling a sitting senator pencil neck on national television, so be it. The pearl-clutching and hand-wringing and op-eds about norms and decorum would only amplify the moment. The criticism would become part of the story. The outrage would feed the algorithm. And the algorithm was what mattered now. Not the editorial boards of major newspapers. Not the consensus of foreign policy experts. Not the judgment of presidential historians. The algorithm. The invisible hand of social media that determined what billions of people saw and shared and remembered. Trump understood the algorithm intuitively. He fed it conflict and spectacle and surprise. He gave it exactly what it wanted, and it rewarded him with reach and engagement and influence that no amount of institutional authority could match. Schiff didn't understand the algorithm, or he understood it and rejected it as a corruption of democratic deliberation. Either way, he refused to feed it. He kept making careful arguments to careful audiences in careful settings, and the algorithm ignored him unless he was reacting to Trump, which meant that even when Schiff won a news cycle, Trump won the larger war, because Schiff's victories were always framed in relation to Trump. Schiff responds to Trump's attacks. Schiff refutes Trump's claims. Schiff challenges Trump's narrative. Trump was the subject, Schiff was the object. And in the grammar of American politics, subjects have agency, objects have position. The Rose Garden made that dynamic literal. Trump stood there for 30 minutes and talked about whatever he wanted. Russia, impeachment, mortgage fraud, bobbleheads, the Constitution. He meandered. He repeated himself. He went on tangents, but it didn't matter because he controlled the stage and everyone was watching him. Schiff stood there for 30 minutes and waited for his moment to respond, waited for Trump to finish, waited for permission to speak that never quite came because Trump's permission was always conditional, always provisional, always revocable with a joke or an insult or a dismissive wave. It was a masterclass in power dynamics. And the truly remarkable thing, the thing that historians would probably debate for decades, was that Trump did it without any institutional authority over Schiff. He wasn't Schiff's boss. He couldn't fire him or demote him or punish him through official channels. He couldn't stop Schiff from being a senator or chairing committees or appearing on cable news or doing any of the things that Schiff had the legal right to do. But he could humiliate him. In public, on camera, in front of 200 reporters and 30 million viewers. And humiliation, it turned out, was a form of power that trumped institutional authority. Because institutional authority is abstract, it's procedural. It's something that matters in committee rooms and courtrooms and legislative chambers. But humiliation is personal. It's visceral. It's something that matters everywhere to everyone all the time. Trump had discovered, or perhaps rediscovered, something that political leaders throughout history had known, but that modern American politics had mostly forgotten. Shame is a weapon. Public mockery is a tool of power. And if you're willing to use them without restraint, without regard for norms or decorum or the expectations of the office, you can dominate people who are constrained by those things. Schiff was constrained by those things. He believed in them. He thought they mattered. He thought that by refusing to descend to Trump's level, by maintaining his composure and his dignity and his fidelity to constitutional principles, he was demonstrating strength. And in one version of America, he was right. In the version where character matters and principles matter and the long arc of history bends toward justice, Schiff's approach was admirable, noble even. But that wasn't the version of America that determined election outcomes. That wasn't the version that shaped public opinion. That wasn't the version that decided who won the news cycle or the media narrative or the battle for attention. In the version that mattered for those purposes, Trump's approach was devastating, because it wasn't about being right. It was about being dominant. And dominance in the attention economy comes from being the person everyone is talking about, the person everyone is watching, the person everyone can't ignore even when they want to. Trump was that person. He had been for a decade, and the Rose Garden proved that no amount of congressional authority or prosecutorial experience or institutional credibility could change it. Schiff brought facts, Trump brought theater, and theater won. Not because the facts were wrong. The facts about the parody transcript were correct. The facts about the whistleblower coordination were correct. The facts about the censure were correct. The facts about the mortgage investigation were, at minimum, under legitimate inquiry. But facts without narrative are just data points. They don't move people. They don't change minds. They don't create the kind of emotional resonance that makes something go viral or shape public opinion or win elections. Trump's narrative was simple. Adam Schiff is a liar who spent 8 years trying to destroy me and failed. That narrative had a hero, Trump, a villain, Schiff, a conflict, the Russia investigation and impeachments, and a resolution, Trump's re-election and Schiff's censure. It was a complete story, and people love complete stories. They're emotionally satisfying, they provide closure, they make sense of chaos. Schiff's narrative was complicated. The president poses a threat to democratic institutions and norms that must be defended through careful investigation and constitutional processes, even though those processes may not produce immediate results or political victories. That's not a bad narrative. It's probably closer to the truth than Trump's version. But it doesn't fit in a tweet. It doesn't work as a soundbite. It requires sustained attention and civic knowledge and a tolerance for ambiguity that most people, most of the time, don't have. So Trump's narrative spread, and Schiff's narrative stayed confined to long-form journalism and MSNBC panel discussions, and the kind of dense articles that people share without reading. The asymmetry was built into the medium. Short beats long, simple beats complex, emotional beats rational, every time, in every context, across every platform. Trump had internalized those rules. Schiff hadn't, or he had but rejected them as corrupt, as a race to the bottom, as the kind of politics that degrades democracy rather than defends it. He was probably right about that too. But being right didn't make him effective. And effectiveness in politics is ultimately what matters, not moral correctness, not constitutional fidelity, not adherence to institutional norms. Effectiveness, the ability to achieve your goals, the ability to win. And by that measure, Trump won the Rose Garden confrontation decisively. He got exactly what he wanted: attention, narrative dominance, viral moments, sound bites that would define the feud for years to come. Schiff got what he always got when he confronted Trump: the moral high ground, the respect of people who already respected him, the satisfaction of knowing he was right, and 78 million people watching his humiliation. That ratio, that brutal arithmetic of attention, was the real story of the Rose Garden, not the substance of what was said, not the accuracy of the claims and counterclaims, not the constitutional principles at stake. The numbers, the views, the shares, the engagement, the algorithmic amplification of one version of reality over another. Because in the end, reality itself had become a function of attention. The things that got attention became real in a way that things that didn't get attention couldn't be. They shaped perception. They influenced opinion. They determined what people believed about their own country and their own democracy and their own political system. Trump understood this. He had always understood this. His entire career, from real estate to television to politics, had been about manufacturing attention and then leveraging it into power. Schiff didn't understand this, or he understood it and found it appalling. Either way, he couldn't compete with it. He could only oppose it. And opposition, it turned out, was just another form of engagement, another way of feeding the algorithm, another way of making Trump the center of the story, which is exactly where Trump wanted to be, always had been, always would be. Go home, pencil neck. 8 words. The perfect encapsulation of everything Trump had mastered and everything Schiff couldn't defeat. Short, memorable, mean, funny, personal, quotable, shareable, viral. And underneath the comedy, a very simple message: I won, you lost, this is my house, leave. The message landed, not just with Trump's supporters, not just with Schiff's opponents, but with everyone who understood political power as a function of dominance rather than authority. Schiff could chair committees. Trump could command attention. Schiff could write reports, Trump could create moments. Schiff could make arguments, Trump could make enemies look small. And in American politics circa 2025, the ability to make enemies look small was worth more than every other ability combined. Always.